Welcome to another A Healthy New Zealand podcast. And today I would like to introduce you to Saul, and I'll try and pronounce the surname. It's like
Yudelowitz. That's Yudelowitz. Saul is fine.
So anyway, I'm going to let Saul introduce himself to you. He has a great story to tell, and take it away, Saul.
Thank you. I was born in South Africa, and actually I grew up there. I'm not South African, but I have parents from different nationality, and I applied to NASA when I was very young to get into the astronaut program when I was in high school in South Africa, and got accepted onto the program provided I pass. Actually, I had to go for 3 medicals, and one was in South Africa, and that was the one that I failed, realizing that I have a red and green color deficiency. And of course, they wouldn't take me on. But that actually in the future was a good thing, because coming from a family of doctors, I spent time with different specialists in their field and realized that the modern medical model is very good at acute stuff, but it's really not good at the chronic stuff. And whilst, many years ago, they invented the vaccine for polio, and a lot of my patients in that era, they just think medicine's a miracle and whatever they say they do. And I can understand that, but we face different issues today, and typically it's chronic disease. And I think the biggest issue of that is nutrition and the pollution of the environment that we reside in. Medicine's approach to this chronic problem doesn't work because they use an acute approach to fixing it, and that doesn't work. Well, it's never going to work. So after spending time with different various members of the family, I was lucky enough to spend time with an aunt of mine in Switzerland. My mom is German, and she taught me really everything that I know. And I used to go there and spend time in the holidays, because I really got into that. I really enjoyed that. And actually, I remember when I first started working there, my job was cleaning the floor. And afterwards, I was promoted to filing, because she said, I wanted to see that you're serious. You can't just come here and treat famous people and that's all nice. You've got to prove your ability. Her approach was very holistic. And she actually told me that I need to, she sent me to a vet to learn about the hormonal system. Vets typically will understand the animals and the different species they work with, because it's different as opposed to a doctor who just has to look at one type of system. And the hormonal system is a very intricate system. There's always an effect. If you do something to one thing, there's an effect everywhere else. It's just how big the effect is. And that was really, she guided me in what I should learn and study. And I'll never forget her explaining to me, how you can't go to university and learn certain things, because the people who determine what you learn are the people who sell the drugs. And it's very controlled, and it will only become even more controlled in the future. And she told me how research will become she used the conversion of the word, if I say fraudulent, in the sense that it's not going to be true research, because she said to me, true research always trends in the same direction. Like, you can't say one day chocolate's good for you and then chocolate's bad for you, or a glass of red wine's good and then it's bad. That research proves that you can't go one direction and then another direction. All good research will trend in the same direction. And the food industry have invested a huge amount into research, and they just put that down as marketing. Ethically, that is not correct, and that's just the world we live in. I can't change that. And so I studied biomechanics, specializing in the lower limb. I came to the UK and I studied osteopathic medicine. And I also have a background in biochemistry, because I believe you definitely have to understand biochemistry to understand nutrition, and fluid mechanics, because pertaining to biological structures, because it's very important to understand how fluids move through the body, not just the blood, and how the mineralocorticosteroids influence that and affect that. I remember coming to London, and my first interview was for a Premiership football club. And I went through the interview rounds, and this was for musculoskeletal stuff like injuries for players, etc., etc. And, when presenting, I was saying, you cannot do this stuff because what you're doing is creating an injury for the player. You can't just quickly fix it and get them onto the field quickly. And in the break, this woman came to me and she said, you just can't say that stuff. And I said, what do you mean? It's true, it's correct. And she said, yeah, no, but it's nepotism. And the person who's going to get the job is the person who knows the coach. I had to ask her what nepotism means, but she gave me, she said she'll pass on a phone number of one of the players. This player was having a recurring hamstring injury that the club couldn't resolve. And as a consequence, they only paid him when he played. I mean, he got paid £50,000 each time he played, but because, he could hardly play, to the club, that was fine. She said, if you can rehab his hamstring, all the players know each other. And so that's really how I got set off in this country in the pro sport, because players sign that they can't go outside of the medical team to seek treatment or advice. It has to be done within the medical team. And pro sport today is, look, unfortunately, professional sport is exactly the same as prostitution. They try and get the players to compete as often as they can. The players make their money from their body. So, of course, that's a shortened career. And the medical team pretty much try and get the player back into competition as soon as possible. And for a very long time, I've been saying, just as there's been, legal cases about concussion, in the future, you're going to see cases about the treatment wasn't correct. It was just about getting the player back into competition as quick as possible. One, medically, that's wrong. Two, ethically, it's wrong. But I realized fighting against a system that's been established, that has deeper pockets than me, et cetera, is never going to work. And so, I treated the players sent players to me. I got into treating Olympic players. Can you give me 1 second? Sorry, my dog is just got like that. And I got into treating Olympic players like that, or I then got into treating Olympic athletes. The problem I found is there's an astonishing amount of cheating. And look, you can't use performance enhancing drugs and another athlete doesn't, and you see there's a small difference. There's a huge difference. And so to me, the Olympics is it's a marketing gimmick. It's not what it used to be. And this is what pushed me further and further away from working with athletes and sport, because my views in musculoskeletal medicine are very different. 90%, 95% of stretching, what you see at elite level, it's completely wrong. 70, 75% of the exercises people do at elite level, professional sport, it's wrong. And so when pro athletes come to me with this enormous list of injuries and, and they go, well, I'm a professional athlete. I go, yeah, you just move wrong. And because you move often, you just wore the system out quicker. But what would shock me is how bad the nutrition is. And when you look at this profession of pro sport, the thing that's changed the most in the last 20 years is nutrition. It's not rehab or stretching and the nutrition it's bad. But c'est la vie. So I split my company into, long-term health and musculoskeletal health. So the musculoskeletal health is for the athletes, and the long-term health, I basically am doing what my aunt taught me, and there's a huge need for chronic disease. So my belief is the way I assess how healthy a person is, and this is extremely important, is what I define as the hormonal balance ratio. Because I believe that we are ruled by hormones, and you simply eat to control your hormones or you are a passenger. And it really is easy to prove, because you can take any hormone, and the stronger the hormone, you can take steroid hormones and stick it into someone and they're going to behave differently. So when you see the research about that testosterone makes you aggressive, if testosterone is released naturally, it will not make you aggressive. But if you take recombinant testosterone, inject it into people, and especially if you mix it with alcohol, it doesn't matter who that person is, they will become more aggressive. Female, male, everyone will become more aggressive. And so it's very easy to prove that the hormones rule us. And the hormonal balance ratio is simply measuring the amount of fat we store between the belly button and the pubic symphysis, which is just a little bit below where a woman would have a C-section, relative to the thighs and arms. So the thigh would be hip to knee, arm would be shoulder to elbow. And when we look back in USA for Africa, when I was a kid growing up, we would look at these little black kids with these big pot bellies, and we would say they are malnourished, we need to feed them. And that actually was the correct description, malnourished, which is exactly the same for obesity. Obese people are malnourished. Now, blaming an obese person or saying to someone who's overweight, you need to eat less and exercise more, simply shows a complete lack of understanding of basic physiology. To say to someone who is malnourished, all right, that they need to go and exercise more and eat less is bizarre. It's just, that doesn't work. Now, we know it doesn't work. I was asked to consult on the original Forsyth's report for the UK government on obesity. And when I looked at this, I just laughed. And what made me laugh even more is they had this whole section how they will not make the same mistakes as the US. They were actually quite arrogant about it. And I just said to them, you guys don't have a clue. Nothing you have proposed in here is going to work. And so whatever amount of money you've put in and all the famous names, and it's just not going to work. Now, I was consulting for someone who was consulting on the reports. It wasn't directly consulting. And when I explained it to this person, they were horrified. Mm-hmm. And, actually this person was a patient of mine, and he said to me, so you're actually telling me you need to do things that are very different to this? And I said, absolutely. You're so far down the wrong road, and the sooner you turn around and come back, you can only start fixing it when you've got to admit how the system works. Then when there's a problem, you've got to address that problem and then move forward. But they just did basically what the US did. And actually the UK are the fattest of Europe, unfortunately.
Right. New Zealanders we're getting pretty obese. We've got the fastest rising level of type 2 diabetes in children in the world. And
that's serious, because the children are the future. When you think of the system and how the whole thing works, there's a pot of money and there is only so much. And if children are already having type 2 diabetes, that's already a much bigger cost to the state moving forward. And what I try to explain to people, and it shocked me the first time I realized it, is that governments don't want people to be healthy because
they don't care.
It's cheaper for them to continue down this road they've gone. They've bought into the pharmaceutical model of there's a pill for everything. And whilst we need medicine and, pharmaceutical drugs definitely have their place, when we apply that logic to chronic stuff, the drug is only managing the problem, not resolving. And that's why Big Pharma, what they call a blockbuster drug, like something for type 2 diabetes, is something a person needs to be on for life. And the word blockbuster comes from, in the old days, a movie where the people would line up all the way around the block to purchase a ticket. And that's where blockbuster comes from. So any drug where someone has to be on it for life, pharmaceutical loves it. And so we can manage diseases. And of course, there's side effects with all these drugs, but there's a lot we can do to resolve. And we don't address that. And the thing is, you can't make astonishing amounts of money out of it. You can't patent these things and become, a billionaire overnight. But if we don't resolve the hormonal balance ratio, meaning when you look at pro athletes, okay, and you see a high hormonal balance ratio, meaning they have a lot of fat storage on the between the belly and pubic symphysis relative to the thighs and arms, then you can look back and go, okay, I can understand why players are having heart attack on the field.
Mm.
Now, we can't compare the average Joe to a professional athlete. That's not reasonable. But so, of course, a professional athlete needs an even lower hormonal balance ratio because cortisol, as you know, is our main stress hormone. And unfortunately, it doesn't get the acknowledgement it deserves. And just as, so for any hormone, like we can get insulin resistance, we can get resistant to cortisol. And any stimulant we put into the body, so stimulant basically ends in "ine", so caffeine, will cause the adrenals to fire adrenaline, and cortisol has to go with that. That is how the system will work. But over time, we will become resistant to cortisol. And we know, this chronic low level of cortisol, it's unhealthy. It creates high blood pressure. The list just goes. But for me, the starting point of where we fail as a species, we're getting too much fat. The hormonal balance ratio is going out. So there's too much fat relative to the thighs and arms. And that's not exercise. Actually, you will see people starting to exercise, they'll do too much cardio, their thighs and arms get skinnier, not leaner, and their belly gets bigger. Because exercise is a form of stress, and we need to eat relative to our stress so that we are able to adapt and then come back to the middle. And unless we eat to be able to control our cortisol, we will never resolve this problem where a lot of the chronic diseases stem from. So as this fat starts accumulating, we start leading into metabolic disease, overweight, obesity. And it just skyrockets from there. There's so many diseases that come out of this. Of course, we eat too much.
Sorry, I was just going to say, can I just ask, because people are probably wondering, how do they find out what their hormonal balance ratio is?
Oh, great question. So the easiest way to find out is you need to stand in front of a mirror in your birthday suit, all right? And you need to take a pinch of skin, all right, between the belly and the pubic symphysis and compare that pinch of skin between the middle of the thighs and the arms. It's typical that you would, if someone's right-handed, they would have a little bit less fat on the right side, and if they're dominant on the right side. But if you can feel there's a lot more fat below the belly in this area relative to your thighs and arms, you're eating wrong. Whatever you're doing is sending you into chronic disease. And so the body doesn't lie. Now, there are other ways you can do it, which starts becoming more medical, but more expensive. So you could measure your cortisol. You could measure it in your saliva. This will not be ideal, but you could measure it in your blood. You could measure it with a pinprick. So if someone was going to do that.
So, from what I'm thinking, listening to you speak, the problem would be with doing, measurements is that, are they going to tell you if you're cortisol resistant? Will the cortisol in your blood accumulate and be really high? Or
but to make this understanding or to work the diagnosis out, we would need a period of time of measuring cortisol so we understand how the body's responding to stress. I'll explain like this. Medicine has a lot of incompetent tests. One of them is for the thyroid, and they measure how the thyroid's responding. All right, so they'll measure your T3, T4, TSH, free T3, free T4. And I explain to patients, if you want to use this measurement, the way I would do it to make that test valid is I would put a gun to your daughter's head and tell you to run on the treadmill at 20 kilometers an hour, then blow her brains out in front of you to show you that I'm serious. Now, at this point, when you've seen this very stressful thing, measuring how adrenaline and cortisol are reacting and what's going on, I could get an accurate understanding of your thyroid. Now, of course, this is an unethical test. Even if it's, I'm tricking your imagination, it's still unethical. So you can't do this. When it comes to something like measuring insulin, all right, you can't just measure someone's insulin and go, okay, that's what's happening. We want to measure someone's insulin relative to how hard the pancreas is working. So if we take a measurement of insulin and we go, okay, it's within the normal range, but it's towards the upper end of normal. However, we know the pancreas is working extremely hard. There's a problem coming very soon because that's simply unsustainable to maintain. It's not going to work. So it's also, measuring it relative to load. So the 50 grams of glucose. Now, of course, insulin responds to glucose and it doesn't respond to fructose. Fructose has a whole different pathway. And actually giving someone that 50 grams of glucose to understand, well, how efficient is the insulin, how sensitive are the receptors, and how hard the pancreas is working, gives us a much more holistic view of where that person is right now, where they're heading. And it's much easier to understand what's going on. But, before insulin goes out in the hormonal balance ratio, we start accumulating fat. Mm-hmm. To answer your question, cortisol resistance is we would need to, so what I would do with patients is, so I have a program I put patients on and they look at me like I fell out of a tree and they say, you're saying the opposite of what everyone else is saying. And I go, yeah, but I'll show you how you can bring your cortisol levels down. This is what you need to eat. And so I get them to measure it. And I go, you have to have your cortisol levels at the correct level at the correct time throughout this 24-hour cycle. And this is the most important thing about hormones, timing. Before dose, timing is way more important because when timing goes out, it creates a whole...
So you've got that circadian rhythm and that
absolutely. And unfortunately,
early morning rise with cortisol,
artificial lights at night, watching too much TV, computer, iPhone, it's really mucking up the system. And so quality of sleep, patients talk to me about how many hours they slept. And I go, quality of sleep is what counts, is something some people talk about, but very few people, because we can only heal when we sleep. Mm-hmm. Someone can go to the gym and exercise. You're literally ripping the muscle apart at a microscopic level. When you rest, that's when we're healing. Mm. And so getting the cortisol levels balanced appropriately relative to the stress of your life. So I promise you, a professional athlete has a lot more stress than what most people will realize. They perhaps think, oh, wonderful, nice. I would never want to be one, and certainly wouldn't want my daughter to be one. But you have to eat to control your cortisol relative to the stress you experience. You can't just say to someone, oh, count to 10, do something different. If you don't deal, stress you cannot take away. And I think, with the social media, it's even more difficult for athletes today. You watched all the time, you have to be super cool. But it's also more difficult for the young kids who are grown up with social media. I didn't grow up with social media and the pressures that social media brings. And I think certainly people my age tend to forget we didn't grow up with that, like what it's all about and the pressure of. And there's a lot of abuse that goes on there. I mean, certainly football players in the UK have suffered abuse because they didn't score a penalty. And kids, from talking to parents, there's some pretty nasty stuff that goes on the social media. But without the ability to adapt to stress, all right, and that will only come from eating correctly to control cortisol, we cannot adapt to the stress. So then the system's breaking down. And then we either run on fat or sugar. And so the person takes the sugar and runs on adrenaline. Sorry, after you.
Oh, I just wanted to touch on those ideas a little bit more. So, we were talking about the adipocyte, or, we were talking about the fat cell. And so the fat cell in many ways controls the hormones that control this whole process.
Absolutely.
And, I'm not sure there's 17 or 18 hormones that are produced that are all like crosstalk to each other and all integrated in this process. And any one of those hormones you can become resistant to them.
Certainly, and leptin's a good example. The pharmaceutical companies, prove that you can't just take leptin, put it in a supplement and give someone a lot of it. So leptin will tell us that we're full. And so just giving someone lots of leptin makes them resistant to leptin, and they just want to eat and eat and eat. And so we can't short circuit the hormonal system. You have to go back to the basics, go look at the foundation of how it works and how it's built, and this will do this, and then you can do that. And if you short circuit it, whilst initially you may get a result and head in the direction you want, the body will always take out insurance and you'll end up fatter than before, because we're designed for survival. No one ever asked the question is, why is the body so good at storing fat and burning sugar? Why are we so good at storing fat? And we think fat is really bad. So of course, storing fat viscerally, on the abdomen, this is not healthy, but it's the body's last ditch attempt to adapt to the stress, because that fat can leach, if you like, into the blood system much easier, much quicker. So if you speak to a cardiologist, they'll say, oh no, we don't like fat on the abdomen, particularly low down, because it increases risk factors for a lot of things. But peripheral fat, like on the buttocks, this is normal. This is not unhealthy. And, as a woman is heading into her, conceiving and going through pregnancy, it's normal to increase superficial fat, but not visceral fat. And this is where the body mass index fails. It works for a very small percentage of the population. A hormonal balance ratio would be more accurate, but you can't explain that to government. And the reason why they don't want to know is, if I go to government and say, listen, I can cure type 2 diabetes, I can cure infertility, depression, and obesity. That costs a lot of money. And they'll tell me, who cares? If I go to the government and say, oh, from this type of treatment, we can do this and make more money, come inside, sir. Let's have a discussion. It's only about, okay, if you can make more money, let's discuss it. Not if you can save more money. So by eating properly, all right, we will resolve a lot of issues. And here's a huge issue. Personally, I think Bill Gates is either extremely dumb or very, very corrupt, but it can't be both. Now, I don't think he's very dumb, but to turn around and say we've got to increase the yield of crop, et cetera, shows a complete lack of understanding of how it works. When it comes to living tissue and growing and repairing, we are not interested in quantity. We are interested in quality. So it's not about how much food we are eating, that like American system, have a buffet, eat all you want. It's about the quality of food. So if I took you to, a fast food place and you ate 3 burgers, chips, and a cola, you'd be full. But in 1 hour's time, you'll be hungry. Because we run on nutrients. We don't run on calories. There's an electron transport chain. Nutrients, that's how it works. Calories was invented to make it easy to explain to school children. And, you can put anything into a calorific bomb meter, which measures the energy. You could put feces inside and go, hey, that's got so many calories. Looking at it from the perspective of calories, it doesn't work. And if we have quality food, then we eat less. You can't eat less if you're putting junk in.
No,
and this is why
I describe it as being a chemical factory. Our body is a chemical factory, and if we're not putting the right chemicals in, we can't create the right output. And I talk about, let's say it's a paint factory and we want blue paint, but if we're not putting the right mix in, we're going to get white paint out. So,
and you will continue eating until you give what the body needs to make the blue paint.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
This is controlled by the hormones. So until we accept the fact and start eating because of nutrients, all right, that's not going to change. So will the fast food companies die out? No. But I think the best way to move forward is to actually educate the public, because there's so much misinformation. And once public start changing, there will be growing pressure on government to change policies, because it's all about money. It's all about money and power. I want to stay in power. I want to make lots of money. And until the masses go, we don't want this, and companies go, hey, you know what, people don't want that. But the thing is, sugar is very addictive. All right. It's as addictive as cocaine, but it takes longer to become addictive. It's not as addictive as heroin. And there's huge amounts of research to prove this. So when you look back, Barry Poplin had some great research, and he showed that, looking back 50 years, you can just see the increase of sugar every single year everywhere. And so today, when I speak to people and I say, well, they add sugar into all bran flakes, and they go, no, they don't. And you look at the ingredients and sugar.
Yeah.
And they look at me and they go, but why do they do that? And I say, well, we want things that are so sweet that if they don't add sugar, people will eat this and go, that's disgusting. I'm not going to eat that. I'm going to eat the other brand. All right. And so, yes, there's a natural way of eating to get off sugar, but
I think we're really faced with a problem because, if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, you have to abstain completely from those chemicals that are affecting, that you're addicted to. We can't abstain from food. We have to eat. And that adds a whole different dynamic in terms of our ability to make choices, our ability to understand. Nobody really understands what the food does in their body. Nobody even thinks about what process the food goes through in our body. Like you say, you've got to understand that biochemical process. And so people just eat and they just say, I eat healthy, or that's not healthy, without any real conception at all. No nutrient value, no consideration of nutrient density.
Yeah, and bioavailability. So my issue with nutrition is the two most important points of nutrition people don't discuss. Where the food is grown, so where the cow eats the grass, or the wheat is grown to make the bread. We don't have a lot of control out of that, and unfortunately our world is polluted and will continue to become even more and more polluted. But then the second issue, which we do have a lot of control over, and this comes into a lot of biochemistry, is how we cook the food. Now, protein's globular, which just means it's shape specific, and if we change the shape slightly, its function's completely different. So cooking at high temperature, all right, makes food have a very low bioavailability. So we are not what we eat. This is not true. We are what we absorb from the food we eat and the environment we live in. Lycopene is a great example, and most men my age will know about lycopene for its anticarcinogenic properties pertaining to the prostate. All these lycopene supplements, you're literally peeing it out. You're literally peeing money down the drain, because lycopene has to be heat bound to a fat and or protein for the body to absorb it. And so when you look at the Mediterranean diet, they cook with the tomatoes. They don't eat the raw tomatoes. And anything that's red, the more red it is, our immune system works in color. The more red it has, the more lycopene there is in it. If you look at, it's easy to tell if a cow eats grass. The fat will be a yellow orangey color, because that is how the immune system works. And the stuff, that color in the grass will be stored in the fat. Fat, that's that like clinical white color. That cow doesn't eat grass. And then we blame cows for fluctuating because we feed them grain. That just reminds me, of Ansel Keys' research he got from a Russian who fed a rabbit fat and said, hey, the rabbit died of a heart attack. But no one put their hand up and said, hold on a second, a rabbit doesn't eat meat. It shouldn't eat fat. It's plant-based. And if you feed anything against its natural, that's not going to work. No one said, well, okay, so from the beginning, it's flawed. So I'm not just going to read further because it's nonsense, the research. And when it comes to food, the temperature we cook it at will determine a lot. So I explain it to patients with milk. Certain proteins are more sensitive to heat than others, and milk folds up in many different ways, and it's bound together with a sulfur double bond. And that sulfur double bond is quite sensitive to heat. So if we leave the milk out of the fridge for a little bit, it's okay. But if we leave the milk out of the fridge long enough, that sulfur double bond breaks down. And so we smell that putrefied smell, and it's clever that we eat relative to smell, because that would be bad for us. We would get sick. Now, all proteins work like that. That just happens at different speeds. So unfortunately, ignorant people are saying meat's bad for you, because if you got meat from the hand of God and you burnt it, it's carcinogenic. Because we live in a world, we live in a universe that's carbon-based. If you burn anything down to its carbon constituent, it's carcinogenic. So you can burn fish and it will cause cancer. You could burn whatever it is and it will cause cancer. That's why when we burn fuel in a car engine and it comes out, it's carcinogenic, because it's burnt down. We're breaking it down to the carbon base. Anything we do with that is carcinogenic, whether it's smoking, deep frying the food and burning it. And so all of these things are bad. Processed meat, processed anything's bad for us. Unfortunately, some people think, tinned food, like in the UK, I had what I would call a discussion, they would definitely say argument, with some nutritionists, and I was saying, well, tinned food is processed. And I go, no, it's not. I was going, well, how can you consider that it's not? Because it can sit on the shelf for a long time. So when you go to the store here, it first was at a main depot. It was then, before that, mass produced in a factory, distributed. So by the time it's sitting on the shelf, it's at least 1 year old. And what they do in the factory, they put a huge amount of rat poison, because a rat can bite through anything. And if they don't, rats will just attack all this food. And so you shouldn't just open it and whatever. You should, if you're going to eat that processed food, you should wash the tin and then open it. Cereal is processed. My daughter's at school, and it concerns me, the junk that they feed them at lunch. And I've raised this point with the principal, but he believes cereal is healthy. And when I said it's processed, he didn't agree. And when I explained why, he was like, wow, I didn't know that. So anything we can put on a shelf and it can sit there for time X, that's processed. And that's not good. So, fast food is very high processed, and it's very bad for us. And other things are processed less. But I understand the world we live in today, we don't give cooking much time. No one really associates an importance with cooking. It's more, I must make more money to buy a better car, a bigger house, nicer clothes, better spectacles. And we don't give this importance to cooking. And cooking takes time. So I used to treat a doctor who used to lecture doctors for spinal stenosis. And mechanically, from the musculoskeletal side, I did as much as I could for him. And we got improvements. But I said to him, if you want to be able to stand in the lecture hall for the entire 3-hour lecture in no pain, on no anti-inflammatories, no analgesics, you have to change the way you eat. And he was, so at this time, he was 60 years old. He was a vegetarian for 40 years. And I said to him, you will come to my house, I will cook you lamb, you will eat it, and you will be amazed. And he said, no, I don't eat meat because it makes me sick. And I said, all that means is you have a very good mind-body connection, because the meat you're eating previously did make you sick. It was cooked wrong. The lamb was cooked, it had pepper, salt, and a little bit of garlic, but it was cooked at the correct temperature. He ate like a horse and he didn't get sick. He felt fantastic. And I explained to him things that he needs to eat to produce more steroid hormones, which produce this anti-inflammatory effect, because at your age, the change in the bones, and we're not going to get a huge change. All right. So we can't put a lot of effort into that. We've got to do other stuff where we can get a big result. And he would stand in front of the students lecturing to them. And one of them came to him and asked what new drug is on. How can he stand for so long? And he referred that doctor to me. And it was an eye-opener to this guy, because he was like, wow, I didn't know nutrition could do that. And I said, well, you guys study disease. You don't study health. So, okay, you study disease because you have to sell medicine. Someone walks in, you have to understand what's wrong, what medicine, manage the medicine. And it reminds me of the joke of, the old lady goes to the doctor and she says, doctor, I'm fluctuating all the time. It's always silent and it doesn't smell. And he gives her the medicine, come back in a week's time. And she goes, well, it smells terrible. And he says, well, now that we've resolved your sinuses, let's work on your hearing. You can't just use medicine to fix these problems. Chronic stuff has to be initially treated with food. And we have to get people to understand what the correct eating is. Of course, there'll be times we go out and we will not eat well because food is a very social thing. So to, be extreme about it and not socialize, that's not the solution. But the easiest way for me, or how I understand, is the hormonal balance ratio. And it's easy. So, that's why I look at Boris Johnson, he literally has gynecomastia. And he's lost weight. That weight he lost, I will bet you anything you want, comes from muscle, not fat, because he didn't teach the body how to burn fat. The body will not burn fat if cortisol is not working properly. If the body feels threatened, it will not burn fat. We have to control cortisol to be able to burn fat. And someone who's done a huge amount of research in a good direction, Professor Lusting, when I spoke to him about my way of looking at it is cortisol and it all, to make it simple for patients, it's cortisol. And he was like, that's an excellent view. And, no one's thought of that. No one looks at it like that. Mm. And I understand there's a huge amount of hormones and the crosstalk and interplay, it's enormous. But what controls this are really the steroid hormones. Our steroid hormones don't just allow us to adapt. It allows us to adapt and thrive. So when our steroid hormone balance goes out, you start seeing we cannot adapt anymore. Mm. And so what we're seeing today in pro sport, which is pretty common, is a lot of athletes putting their hand up and going, well, I'm taking a time out to deal with anxiety, depression, et cetera, et cetera. This is the best kept secret in pro sport. And it's been going on for at least 5 decades. The national German goalkeeper 30 years ago almost committed suicide. And at the time, people were like, what? We can't understand. We don't know why he did it. And this problem's been ignored for so long. The higher you go in terms of earning money, the bigger the pressure. And now with social media, even more. So because they don't eat in a way which allows them to deal with the stress, we're starting to see athletes falling quickly. All right. One drops out of the tennis tournament because the pressure. And you get people, so you get athletes who support because they can relate to it. But people not in the game, they will say a whole host of different things. The question we should be asking is, hold on a second. We have someone who's very good at the sport who dropped out and they can't deal with the pressure. What are we doing wrong? Mm-hmm. And if that's happening in sport, what's happening in school at our kids, where it's even more difficult to communicate with young ones, and they won't come and just say, anxiety, depression, before it's very well down the road. And it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, I think.
And I think what we see a lot is people living a life that's full of stress, work, family, financial responsibilities, and their way of trying to deal with the physical processes that are going on, they're becoming unwell, they're gaining weight, they have brain fog, they've got pain in their joints and things like that, is to go on calorie restricted diets, often vegetarian or vegan diets, and go to CrossFit and train like hell for.
Again, it just shows you how effective marketing is, because first of all, we use something called cholesterol, and plants have a sterol. Animals have cholesterol. And there's an astonishing amount, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people he doesn't exist. And that's what, they've done with cholesterol. And, cholesterol can be treated. So I have treated patients with cholesterol, and I've said to them, listen, you can look at the research. This is what I've personally done, because I never ate like this all the time. And this is the effect it had for me. If you want to do it, you're welcome. And they go on that eating plan, they're measuring their cholesterol, and they see it comes down into a healthy zone. And the thing that gets them is they're like, why do they tell you the opposite? Why is it like that? Now, if you went to governments, and you said to the Western governments of the world, we can get people off statins. You know, you don't have to pay that bill, because that's who pays the bill predominantly in most countries. You know, they just wouldn't care. If you said, I can get you to make more money out of statins, they would care. And so because they've been kicking this can down the road for so long, you know, changing it now doesn't work. So someone who I respected and who put his hand up and said, guys, we've done it wrong, was Professor Tim Noakes. And I was actually going to do a PhD with him as my supervisor. And I chose him because of that, because I thought to myself, someone who can admit the truth, being a professor and all that research that he's done previously, and go, well, hold on, we made a mistake. You know, I looked at that and said, well, that takes guts, because most people will not do that, even if they know it's wrong, because they're making too much money in the system that they're at, and et cetera, et cetera. And so it's quite something to admit that. I did not do the PhD. We didn't agree on a few things, but this is not the point. My point is, people think if it's on Twitter or someone famous says it, oh, that's it. You know, and certainly what you're seeing with things like COVID, you know, there's a very polarized view. And if you say, well, I would like more research on how things work, it's like, oh, you're an anti-vaxxer. Now, there are vaccines which I think are definitely required. So like the polio vaccine. I think someone would be taking a very large unnecessary risk not to get, for example, a polio vaccine, all right? If someone got Ebola and they didn't get the vaccine, you're dead. And it will happen quickly. Definitely, even with the vaccine, you may die, all right? So there are some vaccines that are absolutely, absolutely necessary. But when you look at a whole new system like this mRNA, and it's, you know, given under an emergency act, and so if this was really such a huge world problem, because this is first time we've shut down the world, and why then does the raw data not become available for anyone to analyze if it's that important to humanity? All right, but because we live in a world where the pharmaceutical pays for the research, they pick and choose. And, you know, if you understand stats, you can reverse engineer anything. It really is as simple as that. And so this is a big problem for doctors. When they read research, they don't understand stats. The vast majority of them don't. So they'll read the abstract, they read the conclusion and go, hey, this is good. You know, the first thing I look at is who's paying for the research. You know, so when it was a big food producer in this country paying for research to show that, you know, packaged soup is just as good as making it fresh, I stopped reading at that point, because there's no ways they're going to tell you, hey, you know, we did this research and packaged soup is not as good. Maybe in an ideal world, they would do that research and go, hey, it's not as good, but you can make it quicker. At least they're honest. But that's not going to happen. And so because they paid for the research, legally, they own the research. And my sister-in-law and I are always at loggerheads, because she, you know, works for one of these companies that does research for a lot of different pharmaceuticals. And I go, you guys just, you know, allow pharmaceuticals to cherry pick what they want, and you reverse engineer it. Like, you can't set up the, you know, the testing, the experiment how you want. They tell you it can be within this range. And so you're very limited in what you can test. It's not real stats, it's marketing.
And then there's so much statistical manipulation anyway, you know, that the public don't understand at all, you know, with risk and hazard ratios, and, you know, I mean, they just really.
But that's why I say it's propaganda.
Yeah.
It's no different to propaganda. And listen, they've employed some bright people to push the research in the wrong way. And we have a huge problem with this. You know, we teach our children we shouldn't lie. And unfortunately, we teach our children, you know, you're going to grow up and go into this perfect world where people don't lie. And it's not like that. It's very much not like that. And it's about the money. And so if someone's doing research or is in medicine or whatever, and they don't toe the line, you know, the research taps are turned off. So I used to work for this economist in South Africa, and he once said something to me, which I've never forgotten. He said, go read a book called He Who Holds the Gold Makes the Rules. And it's very true. You know, if you have more money and you can pay for a lot more research and, promoting it, and the US is like that. You can see the way they promote this research, which is flawed. And then we know advertising works. Of course it works. There's no doubt about that. And then people believe that. And you create this cognitive dissonance and, oh, I have this problem, I take this pill, no problem. Oh, that pill, we have a better pill for it now. Take this pill now. And so it goes. I don't know if I owned a pharmaceutical company, maybe I'd be exactly the same. I'm not sitting in judgment. I'm just saying, the system we have is very flawed. All right. And it's okay if someone wants to sell something that's junk, but people need to be educated so they can make an educated choice. It's their choice, of course, but at least they understand. But this problem of chronic disease it's not just going to get worse. The onset, you're going to see it happening younger and younger.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when it comes to it's costing way too much compared to what government makes out of the system they're using now, it will change. Because there is only so much money. You can print, it doesn't work like that. There's only so much money. And in the last couple of years of our life, that's where we spend the vast majority of our wealth on health. And it's quite concerning when you see in the US how 20% of the people in 2018 in the US who went bankrupt was because they could not afford their healthcare costs. And you got to think to yourself, the system's not working. If people are going bankrupt because they can't afford healthcare, and okay, the US is the most expensive by a long shot. Second most expensive is Switzerland. There's a big problem. And this is not going to change until a lot more children are growing up, for example, with type 2 diabetes. And this is now costing the governments much, much more. It won't, because governments, it's not in their interest to rock the boat now. They won't.
And there's this underlying concept that taking medication, I think you touched on it earlier, taking medication cures the problem. It's okay. I take my metformin and my insulin for my type 2 diabetes. So I'm okay to keep eating this crap.
Yeah. And so, you see, I don't think people are stupid. I do think people are lazy. And so it's very convenient in the world we live in where it's like, oh, I'll take my metformin and I can still eat this crap. As opposed to going, okay, I'll continue on my metformin, but I want to see how I can change my nutrition so that in the future, I don't have to use this. No doctor has ever discussed that with their patients, and they're certainly not encouraged to. Doctors are taught to sell medicine. They're literally legal drug dealers. If someone's on the street corner selling cocaine, that's illegal. But just because there's a law doesn't make it right. In the US, just before COVID kicked off, it's US law that if you're in the Senate, you can buy and sell shares if you know something. So they knew certain industries were going to lose a lot of money and others. So they would sell shares in those and buy in others. Now, because they made a law to say that that's legal, it's not wrong. Everywhere else and to anyone else, that's considered insider trading. So just because there's a law that says it, it doesn't mean that's right. Now, we as a society have conditioned people to believe that it's the medicine. And so, anyone on metformin they have to continue their medicine. You can't just stop that because that's going to create a problem. But you can look into other ways of nutrition and go, all right, how can I wean myself off this? And in the vast majority of cases, you can, but quality takes time. I've always joked with my patients and I say, one day they're going to come out with a pill for pregnant women where they'll only be pregnant for 5 months. And they laugh and I go, you'll see how many women will take that pill. Pregnant for 5 months as opposed to 9. And when it comes to living tissue, quality counts. So we could make a car engine at a high quality very quickly, but living tissue, you can't. The faster you do it, quality goes down exponentially. And we've had some major flaws and problems in the past that we've believed, and it does show how lax the law is relating to food. What's even worse than food and what's even regulated worse than food is makeup. You wouldn't believe the crap that they put in makeup. It's bizarre. And how it's regulated, it's even, the regulation is much less than food. And unfortunately, most of these rules are written in blood. People will die or have a problem, and then they go, oh, we need to look into this and see what they're putting up. You can't do that. But that's the world we live in. So what I say to people is, you can't fight that. You're not going to change. You can write a letter to the politician. What you need to do is accept the facts that the world is going to become more polluted. Even if you do your bit to pollute less, great, but it's going to become more polluted. And as it becomes more polluted and more toxins, you have to have the ability to detoxify. You have to eat properly. Controlling where your food's growing, we have very little. Controlling how it's cooked, we have most of the control. So for me, a microwave is just an expensive kettle. It just works on the resonant frequency of a water molecule, and that's not cooking food. And it's easy to prove when food's cooked properly, people don't need as much food. They need less. The world we've ever known has always had more water than land. So it's not about growing more crop. It's about growing better quality crop and cooking it properly so that we don't need to consume vast amounts of food. Trying to play it like that, where we're just trying to grow more, we're chasing our tail. That's never going to work. Actually, New Zealand used to have some of the top beef in the world at one stage, and it's unfortunate to see how farming practices changed. And my wife comes from the Balkans. They've had a few wars, and one of the advantage of the war is you can still see in some places the farming hasn't advanced in this way of about big yield. And so, like I said to my wife, there's places I can go where I can get meat that's organic, that's excellent, and it's really cheap. And in London, I can get the best claimed organic meat for 5 times the price, and the quality is not even close. But that's the world we live in. And those things we can't change. My advice to anyone is, if you change one thing about nutrition, change the way you cook. Food needs to be cooked at 100 degrees Celsius. So you can take lamb, spice it up how you want, stick it in your oven. You've got to buy a thermostat to check where 100 is. You can't just accept what it's telling you, because you can't accurately tune the thermostat to 250 and 100. Something cheap on any online shopping place, you can work out where 100 is. So for my top of the range German Neff oven, 120 is actually 100. And you can cook the meat in there. It's so tender. You will eat a little bit and you'll be satisfied. And this is the point I make with people. Food is like breathing. So we are sitting here having a conversation, but we're not thinking about how much air we're breathing in to extract oxygen. If we go for a run, we will naturally breathe faster. And food should be like that. It shouldn't be like, oh, how much should I eat? Should I eat a lot, a little? Food is natural. Like all the religions of the world talk about, cleaning yourself before you eat and eating in a relaxed way, enjoying your food. Food is not, it's not torture. It's not, you're not torturing yourself and going, well, I don't want to have another. And if you are craving the sugar or the desserts or the, trying to tell yourself, don't have it, that's not going to work, because you've got to fix the reason why you crave that dessert. Because if you eat properly, you'll have dessert once in a while, and that's reasonable, but you won't feel the need for dessert most of the time, because it's about hormones. And it's mentally, we can never win the war. We might win a battle or two. So someone who is craving chocolates and they don't eat that chocolate, a day or two later, they eat 3-4 chocolate bars. You cannot win this battle. You've got to fix the reason why. And if you don't address the reason why, you'll never win. And
so what about nutrition and mental health then? Because I think, a lot of it comes down to, I think mental health plays a huge role in this as well.
Absolutely. I think the 3 biggest problems, diseases of our time are neurodegenerative disease. So that's covering all the mental health. Depression, it falls under that umbrella. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, ALS, infertility. So when you look at the research of any animals and they pollute the water a lot, fish population just drops. And obesity. And I think all three are intimately linked. And so what I say to people is, you can think of, you have to get the hormonal balance ratio corrected, because if it's not corrected, we can't heal. So eating for neurodegenerative disease, if we look at the central nervous system, the brain and cord, when we work with the brain, the brain runs on fat. That system runs on fat. The muscles will want the sugar, for energy. Now, you can get muscles running off fat. That's not a problem. But when you're healing, when you look at embryology, embryogenesis, we are not born with a yolk sac because we used up all that cholesterol to create the neural tube, forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain, and then it all developed off that, the 3 layers. And so cooking food properly at the right temperature, first and foremost, is key, because fat is by far and away the most powerful antioxidant for the human body. So when I was treating a patient who had extremely high levels of mercury, and I said to him, listen, if you go to a doctor, they're going to do chelation therapy, which will pull it through the kidneys. Now, as that little piece of mercury comes through the kidneys, it's going to damage a part of the kidney called the nephron. Once there's a hole in it, it will form a scar tissue, which means it's reduced functionality now. So it's going to damage the kidneys permanently. And he asked the correct question. He said, so how does the body naturally get rid of it? And I said, through feces. It's not that all of a sudden mercury's in the world. Actually, that's where the saying Mad Hatter comes from in England. People who used to make hats that had mercury in the glue, and they knew if you were a hat maker, you would eventually become mad. So if you're eating fat that is cooked at the correct temperature through the whole system with the gallbladder, so as long as someone's got a gallbladder, you will be able to get rid of heavy metals in the natural way, through feces, not through urination. All right, and I have his medical tests to show like where the level was, where his cholesterol was, and as time went over a 6-month period, his mercury went from, I think, 15 down to 3, and cholesterol also dropped down. And that's the correct way of doing it. Now, you can't patent that or whatever, it's not a money maker. So pharmacy is not interested in it, but the fat's cooked properly. So,
So where does gut health play a role in this? So you're talking about the fats and, sort of the bile and bioproduction and things like that. How's gut health going to play in that? And and digestive enzymes and.
This is a great question. The French have an excellent saying, he got my juices going. And what it literally means is to get the pancreas to start producing the digestive enzymes, in preparation for the food. Now, in order for that to happen, we need the correct levels of numerous things, okay? And all of this is based in steroid hormone. So our body can produce steroid hormones. The body can produce cholesterol, the liver. But in terms of the totem pole, in terms of importance, what we consider important is not what the body considers important. So the body will consider cell survival the most important, and certain cells rate higher than other cells. So the heart never rests. Like when we're sleeping, it's still beating. So that will have a higher preference as opposed to muscle, which when we're sleeping rests. And the body's not going, well, I have to work with this very difficult person who stresses me out at work. The body doesn't rate that high up for survival. Now, we may rate that high up for survival. So you've got to get enough cholesterol relative to your perceived stress, which is physical, mental, and emotional. And mental and emotional are different stresses, because if you have a partner, so if 2 people are married and you're arguing, okay, this is emotional stress, and it's a very high toll. Mental stress is the example of the person at work, and physical stress is exercise, if you want. Physical stress is heat. It's much more difficult for the body to cool from heat than it is to warm up. And so, with this heat wave we see in the US, it's for the old people, because the thyroid's second most important role is cooling the body down. You see people dying. But getting food cooked at the correct temperature will help with the gut, the microbe. Also, very, very important. And this falls under cooking food properly. Certain foods need to be fermented before we consume it. And the easiest way to explain this is gluten. Now, gluten you're going to find pretty much in 95% of all carbohydrates throughout the world for all of history. No one can consume raw gluten. It's not accurate to say gluten intolerance. There is not a single human in the species of our entire history who could eat raw gluten. When you look at raw gluten under an electron microscope, it looks like the ash from a volcano. And the reason why an aeroplane, a jet plane, can't fly over that is because it's very sharp and it scratches the blade. And those blades are balanced so finely that it starts vibrating. And in order to protect the engine so it doesn't vibrate and fall apart, it's designed to knock the next blade off. And so that whole ring of blades goes off. Eating raw gluten gets into the stomach, and it's like shaving with a blunt razor. It doesn't cut, it tears. And so we get this inflammation and this whole inflammatory response. We need to ferment it. So I use chickpeas or, fresh beans as an example. And my wife likes to, let it sit in water overnight. And I say, that's not enough because it hasn't fermented enough. Certain things need to be fermented longer than others. And, when we pickle things, so my mom's German and sauerkraut was a big feature, and all countries have their traditional, because we had to do this to allow the food to last through the winter. This is the best natural place to assist the gut bacteria. And we're also looking for variety. So if you're just going to eat cabbage, you will have just a specific type of bacteria. Variety here is the spice of life, definitely. And so we want to use lots of different colors. And it's easy to pickle food yourself. We could buy probiotics. And the thing is, when it comes to probiotics, it is a very important part of gut health. And people don't talk about this. Bacteria produce something called a biofilm. Good or bad, they all produce a biofilm. And it's the biofilm that creates the magic. So the biofilm, one of the things it does is it allows the bacteria to communicate. So when we take an antibiotic, the bacteria, so we measure it in colony forming units, will sacrifice some bacteria and they will die, but they will learn what they need to adapt to become resistant. Okay, so if you think of working as a unit, that's a pretty good example. Ants do a similar thing. And unless we get in the supplement form that probiotic to adhere, to bind onto the gut wall, and there's enough, it doesn't start forming this biofilm. So my advice for patients, whenever you take a probiotic, you want to take it with a supplement called butyric acid. And this will assist binding on the wall. So when you look at the research, some people swear by probiotics and other people go, it's just nonsense. And you can't just start increasing the dose of probiotics because it will just give you diarrhea. The body can absorb a point, and beyond that, it will just flush it out. The supplement is never as good as the natural thing. This is not possible. And so initially in the beginning, I think it's reasonable for people who need to take the probiotic in conjunction with butyric acid. Now, butyric acid just does not smell nice. It really has that like sulfury, vomity smell. And so, having, a pot of those supplements at your work, if you took it out your drawer and popped a couple, your colleagues are not going to come and speak to you. And I don't know, maybe someone wants that, but it's got a very distinct smell that's not very pleasant. So if we start in there, okay, but the goal is not living on supplements. The goal is living on natural food. And once we pickle food, we can pickle a lot within reason. And when we ferment food, this is where the majority of the bacteria we need are going to get into our gut. Because if we start fermenting food in our gut, this is not the place. And so bread is a good example. Today, you can go to the store and buy bread. That is not the bread that's described in the Bible. I make bread at home, okay? I use baker's yeast, salt, water. The bread rises, cook it. And so you can eat some bread and you'll come to the point where you're satisfied. You can take store-bought bread, especially if it's self-raising flour, and you can just eat and eat and eat it. You'll never be satisfied. You can go through 4 or 5 loaves of bread a day and you will not be satisfied, because that's not food. The body cannot use those nutrients. And this is something that's extremely important for people to understand. Now, if you want to buy that bread from the store and it's convenient, okay, that's your choice. At least you know how it works. But some things have to be what I call pre-digested, fermented before we cook it. And if it's not, we have this huge problem, because think of it. The tube that runs from our mouth to our anus is external. Our body is wrapped around that. And so 75% of our immune system's there. That's pretty clever, because, if you're fighting a war, you put most of, your army, whatever, where you are exposed the most, and that's the stomach. So if you speak to a hunter and they kill an animal, they have to gut it. They can't eat what's in the gut because it's rotting. If you eat that, you'll get sick. Another important point that people don't speak about is humans are hunters. So when a lion or a lioness kills an animal, they eat the organs. The scavenger eats the leg of lamb, if you want. Only when food is scarce will a lion eat the leg of lamb. And so if we go back to, in this country, they call it offal. So first, it needs to be cooked properly. So if you're eating organ meat that's cooked properly, you will be amazed how you feel. Mentally, in every aspect. Now, you can't just eat just organ meat. We need balance. And so there's also some foods that will be pre-digested or fermented. If you make your own bread, even if you just do it once a week, and then the bread doesn't last the whole week because it's fresh, it's not going to. It doesn't have all these preservatives and junk inside that they put in. So it can sit on the shelf and be nice and soft for months on end. And even the yeast doesn't want to eat it. So what do you think is happening inside the microbiology of our gut if the yeast doesn't want to eat that stuff? It's bizarre to think what little importance we have given, because if we can't absorb, we can't heal. It's as simple as that. And so we give such little importance to this entire process. Sympathetic and parasympathetic. In order for the secretion, so to release those digestive enzymes, it's parasympathetic. So sitting and eating when you're stressed, it's not working. At best, it's working poorly. At worst, it's not working at all. So the food, whilst we feel full, the food is rotting. And so it's not possible that you're starting from a position where whatever you're doing, it's not going to work. You could be eating the best food in the world. If it's rotting in your gut, it's not going to work. And it's really important. My daughter, we have a rule in the house, no TV while we're eating. Because, you see a lot of people in football, they get so emotional, heart attack. Okay, this person has already a problem. But if we're eating and watching something that's emotional, we're moving out of the parasympathetic into the sympathetic. Sympathetic, blood away from the organs of digestion, muscles, hindbrain, fight or flight is coming in. And so the body's not interested in digesting food. It's interested in either fighting or running away. The body doesn't understand, hey, there's a TV there and it's driving this emotion inside you, which is, I want him to score the penalty. He better, it understands that adrenaline's coming in. I'm going away from digesting whatever you put inside me, and fight or flight's kicking in. And so we have to give eating, the process of eating, the due it deserves. It should be done in a relaxing way. Now, okay, at work, that's going to be very limited. I get it. People live in a world where work is stressful, eat quickly, and some people are not even taking their lunch. But where you have the opportunity to eat in the environment that you can affect, you want to grab that with both hands and feet. And these are really the starting points. Food that requires to be fermented needs to be fermented enough. All food needs to be cooked properly, all right? And eating in the environment where that's applicable, that you can make it as appropriate as possible. And from this will lead into better quality sleep, okay? In truth, we all wake up a couple of times during sleep. It's just for a very short period of time and we don't remember. And so we don't hit this long phase of the healing and then REM, and we go through these little cycles. And this is how it builds cortisol. And, again, cortisol, the great thing about cortisol does not discriminate. It runs through the system and it breaks things down, including cancer. And here is another good point. I have cancer in my body. The reason why I don't have any symptoms is my immune system's dealing with it. And so anyone who has cancer and they don't start at the place where the problem originated and they go downstream, it's not possible to fix. So you have to start with the immune system. You have to work on getting the gut healthier because such a large amount of the immune system resides in the gut. Gut lymphoid associated tissue. If you pump sugar into that system and you grow candida, that's not going to help the immune system. Now we've got inflammation, leaky gut, immune system suppressed even more. And so what I tend to find is with the humans, we either snowball in the right direction or we snowball in the wrong direction. It's either working and everything's going against us or it's working for us. But getting these foundations sorted out, and without having this foundation to build a strong health on, mental health, because however hard mentally we feel it is today as adults and growing up as children, for our children, it's definitely going to be a lot harder. And that's the world. What are we going to do? We can't shut the internet off. We can't go back 500 years in terms of technology. That's not going to happen. There are things we have to accept. However, we would like to eat to be able to adapt to these stresses. And if you speak to any generation, they'll tell you that, when I was a child, people weren't that rude. When I was a child, it was much easier. When I was a child, it wasn't so difficult. We all like that. And when we grow up, we look back and we go, look at the kids today. They behave so badly. Everybody does that. Nothing stays the same. And so we need to adapt with the times. Otherwise, we get left behind. Now, big problem we have is adapting with the times for nutrition. You can't typically go to government for advice. Their advice is not going to allow you to be healthy. They don't want you to be healthy. And so we should always, and I think this is a very important point, when it comes to health, because there's so much information out there, there's two things I say to patients. Number one, when it comes to health, you have to be logical, not emotional. So because someone famous said it, that value is zero. That's just emotion. All right. And then the other thing is if you're going to do something, so let's say person A says, I did this and this worked for me. Would you tell your child to do that? And if you wouldn't tell your child to do that, then don't do that. Like if that's not the advice you would give your child, don't do it yourself. The truth is out there. And if you haven't found it, keep looking and you will. It's just under a pile of a lot of misinformation, because when it comes to good nutrition, you can't follow the money. That's not the way you'll get there. Yeah, following logic will get you there. And unfortunately, today we very much emotionally driven because someone famous said it, and he is on this apple cider vinegar diet and oranges. I'm going to do it because if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. And we don't have that luxury. That's just taking an emotional approach to health, and it's not going to work, because I promise you, as an athletes have a short career and they will promote crap to make money. I don't blame them for that. That's the nature of the work. It's like when you work with models and I say to them, listen, you can either get to the shape you want to be in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way, but I'm not trying to change the industry. No one wants to see, someone who doesn't look appropriate walking down the runway. We can be as politically correct as we want. Truth is, we all discriminate, and it comes from this. When we look at someone else, procreation has a very high importance on our totem pole. And if we see someone with a disability, we don't want to procreate with them because insecurely we think, we can't have good offspring. In the old days, this was a big thing. Families would marry, and if one, if the bride or the groom had, blind in one eye, whatever it is, they're like, no, we can't marry him. what about your children? That's not going to work. You know, to an extent today, we do that less, but in terms of procreation, we still do that. And that's why when you see someone in a wheelchair, most people will discriminate against them blindly because it's inbuilt into us. And so someone who eats properly will understand and go, okay, you know, so they're in a wheelchair, they're going to have a very different view and an advantage somewhere else where I just didn't even see that. And so there is definitely something I can learn from this person. But in order to have these balanced conversations, you have to eat properly because, look, it's like children. When my daughter comes home from school and she's upset, and if I start explaining to her how you must do the mathematics, and she's just on adrenaline and she's not interested. And so if someone's running on adrenaline, trying to have a discussion with them, that's not going to happen. They're just going to hammer their belief system home. They're not going to challenge their belief system, and they will literally call you an idiot. And that's saying it in a polite way. If you want to have a discussion with someone, you know, they can't be running on adrenaline. And then it's a discussion because ultimately we both learn something and we both evolve. And, you know, there's something that that person gives me that's better what I'm doing and vice versa. And that's why we both improve. But because predominantly we run on adrenaline, these discussions are not possible. And it's the discussions that go against your belief system where we're going to get the biggest improvement. And you have to eat properly to be balanced, to be able to have those discussions. Otherwise, so it's okay, it's acceptable when a 5-year-old kid's doing that. But when an adult's doing that, that's not acceptable. And I literally explained to my daughter yesterday, I said, you know, sometimes kids behave like an adult, and that's acceptable. But there's times where adults behave like kids. It's not acceptable. And she couldn't understand why. She said, why would that not be acceptable? And until we get this resolved, you know, people will not change. They won't. For me, what was the most shocking thing is when I work with patients, and what I say to them is, I'm going to take your belief system of nutrition and I'm literally going to destroy it. And then I'm going to give you something, all right? I don't want you to just blindly believe in it because I say so. I want you to ask why. The most important question is why. And if I have to use big medical terminology to explain it, it means I don't understand. But if I can explain it to you in a logical way so you understand, then you really need to consider that seriously and make your decision and build your belief system on that. That's logic. Emotion is, I'm just accepting it because Saul said. That's not correct. And you have to change. So if you break a belief system, you have to rebuild it. Otherwise, you're literally depowering the person. The goal of nutrition has to be to empower our patients to be able to be independent and not consistently rely and depend on us or help. Of course, initially in the beginning, yes, that's reasonable. But if they're always depending on someone for assistance, what they're doing is not working because you should be able to be independent. And that's why I don't say to patients, I'm going to give you and tell you what to eat. No, that's just being lazy. I'm going to explain to you, this is how this works, because you live in New Zealand. Now, if you leave New Zealand, you go to America and you look at the food store there, it's completely different. And you're going to say, oh, you need to make me a new nutrition program. You have to understand, if I eat this, it's like this. If I eat this, okay, this I don't want to eat. And having an understanding of why is absolutely, absolutely important. And it's the most important question to ask. Don't just accept anything at face value. Why cook at 100 Celsius? 100 Celsius is the temperature water boils at sea level. And so because protein's globular, we could think of it like this. When you eat chicken, you don't grow feathers, all right? You don't grow the characteristics of that animal, because in a normal gut, normal functioning gut, what will happen is the proteins come into the body. So these are chains of amino acids. If you are producing enough hydrochloric acid, ultimately those proteins are broken down into single amino acids. If a chain of protein gets into the blood, the body looks at it and goes, this is foreign, and you have an immune response. Your DNA literally assembles those proteins together to make soup. And that's why you don't grow chicken feathers on your head And that's why we can grow and evolve.
Mm.
That's assuming it's cooked properly. So if we cook that chicken at high temperature, all the fat in it is absolutely toxic. The proteins have changed to a position. So we have these things called heat shock proteins that allow things to absorb heat, but there's a limit. And now, once the shape of the protein has what in biochemistry would say denatured, but let's say it's distorted, all right? Sometimes the body can't chop it up properly, and you get these chunks of proteins, and there's an immune response. If it's burnt and it's black, carcinogenic. So now you look at the gut microbe and that no one's talking about and going, hold on, what are you exposing that microbe to? And you don't even have the correct balance inside there. And you'll never get the correct balance from supplements. It's just not possible. Supplements is a stepping stone to if the system's really imbalanced and bad. But for something like this, it can only come from natural. You can't live on a supplement like this forever. That's never going to work. And this is the key. This is how we should be thinking about nutrition, not, how quickly can it be made? I go to the restaurant. How quickly can you make that? Yeah. Today, unfortunately, look, I'm old, and I always complain to my wife, who's younger than me, and I go, people are not interested in quality. They'll come and tell me how fast they can do it. They won't say, listen, I need this amount of time to do what you're asking. And fine, if that's the amount of time you need for quality, because we want this instant gratification, and that comes from running on adrenaline. We want it now. I don't care if it's quality. I want it now. And so now the things we start achieving, the value is not really that good. If you speak to anyone in life, something worth achieving, it takes time. It's not instantaneous. And literally that's why we respect these people. So when you speak to someone like famous basketball player, and they just shoot a goal so easily, and they go, wow, they'll say to you, well, you didn't see the amount of practicing and effort that's gone into to get to that goal. You're not born and that happens. And then you take a step back and you go, wow, I respect that. That's amazing. And so it's like that with everything in life. Quality takes time. We have to also, I think, it's very important to look at embryogenesis, how the organs form, to understand healing. Because if you don't understand how the organ forms, you can't heal it. And unfortunately, I found when I studied embryology, the lecturer understood his stuff, but my God, the way he explained it, it was dry, boring, uninteresting, and when I actually went to someone else to learn embryology, and it's just fascinating. It's truly amazing how we come into existence. And there's another point here which I use in embryology to explain how I measure aging. Calcium in soft tissue is not a good thing. So your rugby players are very good. The Polynesians are just generally really, really strong, deep lordosis, very thick muscle. But they also tend to have high heart disease. But if you look at the Asians, they're not really big, strong muscle. If you go to China, and the hair's typically always straight, and they don't rule the power sports like Africans and the Polynesians. They have much less heart disease, much better flexibility. For the muscle to contract, one of the things that has to happen, we store calcium, and calcium will go out of the cell, okay? And if you do exercise and you have that stiffness the next day, in a microscopic, if you're looking at a microscope, you've got these tiny little pieces of calcium in the tissue. And that is what DOMS is. That's where it comes from. And so, what athletes are doing, they're having these cold baths, which the Russians and Indians and Chinese medicine's correct. That will speed up the blood flow. And so it helps them to heal faster. But if we have calcium deposited in the arch of our aorta, which is the most accurate measurement of heart disease, that's not a good thing. Because when you look at the system of how it works, and the heart is contracting to force the blood out, and it comes up, out, and it's basically doing a 180-degree turn, that aorta has to expand as that blood bolus passes and then contract afterwards. A great deal of flexibility is required. the shock wave running through it will astound you. All right. And that has to happen always. It's just sometimes it's very high the force and sometimes it's much lower. Once calcium is inside there, which is nature's way or the body's way of going, okay, I'm going to make it stronger. So I'll have less flexibility, but more strength because it's been damaged. That's a problem. So if we get calcium spots on the heart, that's a problem. If you get calcium in the eye, glaucoma, calcium on the brain and cord, multiple sclerosis, right? Calcium in soft tissue is not good. And we can decalcify soft tissue. And we want that calcium, not just put in bone, but we want that calcium put in bone in the correct way. So, just scoffing down lots of vitamin D, whilst it will make your bones thicker on a DEXA scan, it's not going to make your bones functionally stronger, because healthy bones, when you actually, if anyone's ever watched a baby being born, you'll be amazed at when the baby comes out. The first time I watched it and I thought, Jesus, the gynae, she broke the arm or the shoulder or both of the baby. That's not possible. Perfect. There's a huge degree of flexibility in bones. And that's correct, because if you think of someone in a rugby tackle, if their bones weren't flexible, they would break. I mean, they're flexible to a degree, but if they weren't, they would break. But now as it's calcified in the wrong way, and this is where biomechanics just falls completely short, and most of it is just BS. The bone becomes more brittle, which means it will just fracture easily. All right, energy is never destroyed. It's just changes from one form to another. So if you can't transmit that energy and you're absorbing it, the bone breaks. Of course, as we get older, we are calcifying. And this is the accurate measure of how we're aging, not your DNA, not your, I don't know, however they measure it, but the amount of calcium deposited in soft tissue is an accurate measure of how quickly we're aging. And I think this is an accurate way of measuring age. Not, we do it once a year when we're born, but there's ways of eating to decalcify soft tissue and get it where you need it. And this is very important. In cancer that is not surrounded by calcium is benign. Cancer that is surrounded by calcium is malignant. And so, when we bury someone, you can go many, many years later and you will see skeleton. We store things inside our bones that are extremely important. We have stem cells, pluripotent stem cells. So if you've passed puberty, they're in the flat bones. So people talk about a hip graft. That bone's actually called the ilium, but it has to be protected, because if a virus got inside there, or a bacteria or a yeast, or they have free reign to do whatever. Who knows what they'll make? And you see this in procreation. It's very important that one sperm fertilizes an egg. You can't have two sperm, because then you have what's called polyspermia. The complement of DNA between mother and father, it's wrong. We don't know what will grow. It's extremely important that it is one sperm to the egg. And so once the sperm hits the egg, there is this chemical process where at the opposite end, there's this calcification of the egg. And once the sperm's in, it's calcified. So any other sperm, when it gets there, it simply cannot get through the calcium. It cannot fertilize the egg. And now we have that one cell, and that one cell will divide, and you have 1, 2, 2, 4. And that process initially in the beginning is purely driven by your DNA, purely driven by DNA. It gets to a point where you're running out of space, and you get the membranes, the outside of the cell touching up on one another. And that now drives the system moving forward. And this is why, you can find DNA dinosaur, but you cannot grow a dinosaur. Now, you would make a lot of money if you had a dinosaur park. I know my daughter would want to go and visit the dinosaur park, but they can't grow these extinct animals, because the way they look at DNA, it's wrong. So the color of your hair, eyes, and skin, that's your DNA, and you can't change that. You don't need to change that. But there's a huge part of our DNA that allows us to adapt to the internal and external environment. And this has been the key to humans adapting and getting to the top of the food chain and surviving. And, I think because we eat badly, we are on the way down, but we look at it wrong. And so how the body uses calcium is an extremely important consideration. And so you can eat to decalcify soft tissue, which is really important. And so you can scan the arch of the aorta. That's quite a skilled task. Not any cardiologist would be able to do that, but this can be done. And so the joke is, I used to consult for an insurance company who insured high net worth individuals. And I would write a report on the musculoskeletal health of, like, they will have a knee problem in time X. They will have likelihood, this group of diseases in time X. But I also included in that report that, we can resolve these things. And so they structured the insurance policy where the fees would go up if this happened within a certain period. And so when these people got these, policies, they're like, and then what started happening is fee was going up, and they were like, how, it was too much of a coincidence because people were talking to each other. And they went to complain to the FSA, the body that regulates the insurers. And on investigation, they said, look, what you've done is not illegal. It's just not in the spirit of whatever. And when I was in the meeting, I was amazed and I said, but none of you asked, okay, you can look at these reports I've produced, and I've also said how you can resolve it. And in the spirit of humanity, you talk to me about the spirit of whatever, but you haven't read the answer. You've ignored it. And to me, that is bizarre. And so, they stopped doing that. But that's how it works. I stopped consulting for them. I'm definitely an outlier. So I will consult and work with athletes and whose medical team can't resolve the problem, treat things that medicine says you can't treat. And it's nutrition. It's not drugs. It's getting someone to change so that it's practical for their lifestyle. That's really important. Whatever change you're going to do needs to be practical for your lifestyle. And you do what they can do. And you start getting improvements. And if they want to go further, fine, you can go further. And then it comes to the point where they don't need you. Does that guarantee they'll never get ill or never get sick? Or no. But it does guarantee that they will have a healthy immune system that is able to respond and then come back into balance. So again, anyone who has autoimmune disease, again, first place I look, the gut, because this is a problem with the immune system. And when it's a problem with the immune system, the biggest part of the immune system is the gut. So anyone who has autoimmune disease, long before their symptoms, have had and still do have gut problems, which have not been resolved and then just have gotten out of hand. So if we don't address it at the source of the problem, it's not possible to resolve. We can manage it with medicine, but that comes with lots of side effects, etc., etc. The world we live in.
It is. Well, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you. You've been talking, I've kept you talking for a long time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm not sorry. I just, it's just been a long time for you. But I do. So
if you want in the future, I could talk about, specific subjects if you would find that helpful.
I would find that really helpful, actually. I think there are a lot of, perhaps afterwards we can have a talk about what specific subjects you could talk about, because I was going to ask if one of the subjects I'd like to talk about in the future, perhaps, because, we probably haven't got time now to go into it in great depth, is for the general population is about exercise, because, the nutrition is so important, but I think people exercise very poorly and that's also really misunderstood. And again, it's more is better, harder is better, more frequent is better. And we come back to this whole cortisol, sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system.
I would love to talk about that. And to quickly, so I'm actually writing a book. And one part the first part of the book is about musculoskeletal health. And what I've said is the goal of musculoskeletal health. So musculoskeletal are your muscles, skeletons, and the position it's in to allow the organs to function appropriately. You have to relearn how to walk properly. So bodybuilding came from Ben and Joe Wilder and is designed to make the muscles big, dysfunctional. You can go to yoga and Pilates and see what they're doing with the core. It's absolute bollocks. Like, the core is not meant to do that. And so you have to learn, whatever you do, you have to learn how to walk properly. If you walk properly, fine. So you see babies walking properly, but then they copy their parents. And you did it before. So if you just relearn how to walk properly, then you have to first start with static postural balance, then dynamic postural balance. And when it comes to stretching, what people talk about is nonsense. So there's a lot of stuff I've done in engineering. I don't have an engineering degree, but it is the correct way of looking at biomechanics of the body. Biomechanics as a degree, for me, it's a waste of time. It's looking at how many degrees, kinematics, and that's not going to teach you how to move properly. All right. You have to understand how the whole system works, what the core is doing to transmit this energy up and down the body, where the energy starts, how it travels down the leg, hits the earth, and comes back up. Now, this is really important. Now, Bruce Lee, Asia, was way ahead in terms of core. If you think of the 1-inch punch, we just gave it different names. So learning how to walk properly allows you to move properly. So when you are old, you can move around and you don't need a Zimmer frame or a walking stick. Now, you're not going to run as fast as you did when you're 20, but you're not going to wear out your hips and need a hip replacement, or wear out your knee, and need a knee replacement. And so when you're old and working in what I do, I see what it's all about. It's not about money. I have patients who are billionaires. And if you have to be taken to the bathroom and cleaned, you're not happy. But being able to functionally integrate with the people you love is what it's about when you're old. And so if you can go out with your grandchildren in the garden and play, or go for a walk, and, you're happy. Pick your grandchild up, give them a hug.
How hard is it to relearn these, proper gait?
It's pretty easy, because the good news is we all used to do it properly when we were little. It just has to be done in the right sequence. So the right stretching needs to be done to attain the correct static postural balance.
Will your book address correct stretching? And
yes, so my first book, which I'm currently writing, is exactly on the subject. Why this, the effect it has on the organs and mobility of the organs, and then where do you start? How do you assess it to understand where to start? And if this is what's happening, this is what you need to stretch to be able to achieve static posture. Once you've achieved static posture, this is what you need to do to achieve dynamic posture. Once you've achieved dynamic posture, you know how to walk properly. And so there's a lot of misinformation where they say, muscle has memory. Muscle is a slave. It's the nervous system that has memory. Nerves control muscles. And the vast majority of people have dysfunctional cores. And when these footballers and athletes, who are supposedly fantastic, I test their core and I say to them, your core is completely dysfunctional, and they go, I exercise. I said, functionality and strength are different. Having something that is functionally strong, you first have to be functional at it to be able to make it functionally strong. But you've just made it dysfunctionally strong. And so I do this exercise, which literally takes 5 minutes to rebalance the nervous system controlling the core. And then I'll give them pepper to sniff, and I'll say, you will feel your core switch on just before you sneeze. It's not a cognitive, it's reflex. There are certain reflexes we're born with and certain reflexes we need to learn. And the core function is a reflex function. So if it's a very strong sneeze, the contraction will be matched. It's appropriate. It's not, very strong for a little sneeze. If it's slow, if the sneeze is slow, the core will switch on slow and also then disengage. And it's completely non-cognitive. That is a functional core. And if your core is not doing that, you don't have a functional core. And so it's very common to find, particularly among young women, this very tight pelvic floor, because they've been doing plank. Plank is, the god of of the core, and it is such a dysfunctional exercise.
And for as long as you possibly can, it's,
But people they're in good company, because elite athletes at Olympic level, at elite rugby level, rugby union, sprinters, they do this nonsense, and it's dysfunctional. The thing is, this incorrect way of doing it, it's percolated everywhere. But of course, when you bring something new, no one likes that. But when you can prove that it's correct, okay, so then they will do. And so that's the whole thing. Football clubs want me to come and work there, and I say I can't, because I'm one person and your team behind the team is like 30 people. All right, just send me the players who you can't resolve, because what are you going to do? Fire all of them. And now I'm coming in and going to tell your head of player care or your head of medicine, what you're doing is completely wrong. You must do it like this. It's going to disrupt, too much. And that's just not going to work. If you want to send players to learn how to, the medical team, a couple at a time to learn how to do it, okay, that's fine. But you can't just completely bash down their belief system they've been doing for 20 years and go, hey, that's wrong, do this. It's going to create too much tension, and the players will feel that and affect the team. And sport is about winning. It's a profession, money. It's about winning, what people don't realize. But core is really important, because this is where energy starts. And, if we're moving properly, and I'll give you a quick example, if I may.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So every human in the world has an anteverted hip. And that's just medicine's fancy way of saying the hip's turned forward. Not every human's hip is turned forward the same amount. All right, the shoulders retrovert, turn backwards. And that shows you in embryology how things develop, and everything's twisting. Every single muscle is twisting, because when we twist things, it's stronger. Okay. Now, the PhD I was going to do I was going to do another PhD with Nicola Mufali on Achilles tendinosis, because this is a big problem in pro sport, and it's getting bigger. And what happens with the Achilles tendon, it comes down and it twists laterally. So it twists towards the outside, and then it attaches to the calcaneus, the bone. And if you have your hip turned in, you're literally untwisting the Achilles tendon, literally functionally making it weaker. If you have your hip turned out too much, that's also not correct. Health is about balance. And so it's got the correct twist in it. And so trying to rehab the Achilles tendon without considering the alignment of the hip, it's just not going to happen. So you have these wonderfully talented players who can have a career-ending or career-limiting Achilles tendon rupture because it's not rehabbed properly. And someone who's brilliant at, and now when we have an injury, it's very important that you have to do things so the brain, it re-earns the trust. So if I snap my Achilles tendon, it has to be rehabbed, and part of that rehab has to include re-earning the trust. And if we don't do that, the movement's always going to happen, and it's never going to be maximum. In the back of my head, I'm going to be thinking, I did this and it snapped, because we designed for survival. And if you don't re-earn that trust, you can never get to the maximum. But the only way you can re-earn the trust is looking at it in a holistic way. So people don't, consider the hip, like they just, oh, your hip. Supposedly, some very famous guy, who rehabs ACL for all the tennis players. And I made a comment on one of the social media sites about this. And I was quite amazed that he didn't mention anything, but a lot of people who support him were saying completely emotional things. And okay, this is for me, water off the duck, my advantage of Asperger's. And I sent him a message and I said, if you would like to discuss, I'm happy. I'm sure we can learn from each other. I don't want you to have the impression that only I can teach you. I'm sure it's both. But there's a very good reason for what I'm saying. And he didn't respond. And so I can only assume he doesn't understand it, and or he doesn't want to learn, a more correct way.
Mm.
Now, just because he rehabs them doesn't mean he's the best. This is what people think. Oh, that person treats someone famous, so they must be the best. Stretching, I'll give you one example of stretching and how incompetent it is. Most people at elite Olympic level, top sport, will consider like bending down and touching your toes to stretch your hamstrings. And this is completely incorrect, because muscle can contract in one of three ways. The muscle can tighten and lengthen, tighten and shorten, tighten, and the length doesn't change. And when we're bending down to touch our toes, our hamstring muscles, the muscles at the back of the thigh, are tightening and lengthening. It's not stretching. Actually, to stretch a muscle, it needs to be relaxed. And I say to patients, it's very easy. I have a way of stretching the calf muscle, which completely changes the mechanics of the foot. And I say, if I've really stretched that muscle correctly, when you walk, you will feel a difference. Your foot will feel in a better, not just a better alignment, but mechanically the way it's meant to work. When I describe to you how it's meant to work, you'll go, yeah, I actually understand. I can feel that. But if you go stretch it, all these, I've never seen the calf stretched correctly. You'll never feel that difference. All right. And because in the foot, most muscles cross three joints. So it has much, the effect is a lot. In most of the other places, muscle will cross two joints. And so, stretching, how people stretch, it's a joke. I mean, I remember studying osteopathic medicine in the UK, and one of my lecturers, I explained to him, you can stretch these certain muscles and it will decompress the spine. And he said, rubbish. I said, okay, well, we can use gold standard. The loser pays for the MRI. And he said, okay. And so I said, well, how do you want to design it? You can choose, because I don't want to design so you go, there's a flaw in it. So I agreed to his design pattern, and every time I did the stretch, there was an increase in disc height. So you can measure very accurately disc height. And he goes, no, something wrong with the MRI. I said, pick a day, pick a machine. I can do this all day, but for you, it's starting to get expensive. And after 3 sessions, he agreed. But the thing that amazed me is he didn't say to me, okay, show me what you're doing to increase decompression. And this is important, because our body moves relative to the stability, the security of the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. And so when I consult for contact sport teams, I say to them, your body will always put your pelvis under your head. So if you whack someone's pelvis, they either have to slow down or they'll fall over. It's as simple as that, because that's survival. But if you're doing an exercise and then your spine is compressed, you're literally threatening the integrity of your brain and spinal cord. And so muscles will tighten up and lock up to stop you moving. If you're moving properly, you're not going to get that compression of the spine. You're not threatening the system. And so when you move properly, you're actually amazed at how much more powerful you are. Right? Most people are much, much stronger than what they think, but they just don't move properly. Athletes do move properly. So when you see athletes, they naturally have their hips in a more neutral position. And that is why they can do what they do. So you see it on TV, you go out and you try to do it and you go, wow, that's hard. If you go look at Dan Carter, famous rugby player from your country who used to kick the goals. And you can see quite clearly what his feet are doing just before his heel strikes the ground and the other leg's going to hit the ball. His hips are, I wouldn't say aligned ideally, but they're better aligned than the vast majority of the general public. And that's why he can kick the ball the way he can so far, so accurately. And in all sports, you see this. Every single sport, because that is how we designed. And if you work with that design, you can only sit back and marvel at it and think it's, wow, it's phenomenal. Man could have not invented something like this. It's brilliant, the design.
So do you teach other therapists at all?
This is how I got into the book. So I'm semi-retired. I have a few patents, and I still treat some Olympic or athletes, but predominantly, the long-term health, the chronic stuff. And I was discussing with someone who I was at university that I would like to do these CPD courses. And he said to me, listen, you work at a level where it just goes over people's head. And it would be far better for you to write a book and then say, right, to attend that CPD course, you have to have the book, you have to read the book.
Yeah.
And he said, you will make a better result from that. And in truth, my guru, my wife, for decades has been telling me to write a book. But with my Asperger's, language skill is not my skill set. So I'm already on I'm halfway through chapter 5, but it's taken a long time to get there. So I have to write and then go back, read over it, and change a lot of things because I know what I'm trying to say. When I read it, I go, oh, there's no ways they're going to understand that. I need to write that differently. And so this is not my skill set, writing. And so it takes me time to get to the point of writing that would be reasonable. But I think the book is the way to go. When it comes to the answer to your question is no. You see, I charge a lot. So I charge £500 an hour. There's no therapist who charge that. And no therapist's going to come to me and pay me that to learn the correct way of doing it. Because there's too much ego in it. I could prove to them why it's worth that. But they won't listen to that argument. Especially if they're working with professional athletes. They'll go, well, I'm making enough money. Why do I need to come and pay a lot of money to do it differently? That's how they'll see it. And I think it's really important for one of the things of the ability to adapt is to teach the brain. There's times where we want to be logical and there's times where we want to be emotional. And so working with fighter pilots, I've done stuff with Air Force pilots, and these guys are easy to work with because you get to a point and the emotion is switched off. And you can just be pure logic, and things progress very quickly. Now, I'm not saying being completely logical is always appropriate. My problem is it's very hard for me to be emotional. And sometimes I can say things and I don't understand on someone's face that they don't like what I'm saying. And so that's why working with professional athletes is easier for me. Actually, in medicine, you're not allowed to call an overweight or obese person fat. Because the guidelines are you're hurting their feelings, etc., etc. Now, I don't think insulting someone is addressing the solution. I think it's just showing your incompetence at understanding the solution. And so I think it's much easier to say to someone, well, listen, if you want, you can do this, this, and this, and you can get rid of this, this, and this by doing this. The way government tries to regulate things, I think it's just normal. You should not try and insult someone and hurt their feeling. That's not a way of discussing things. My grandfather did explain to me. He said, if you're going to tell someone something that's very different to what they're doing, he said, make sure that they're comfortable before you tell them. And I was like, he explained this to me when I was very young, and I guess he picked up on how I see the world. And he said, well, you don't do it in front of their colleagues or in front of people they're working with. Go somewhere private, sit down. You don't do it at your house or their house. Go like neutral territory. Make them as comfortable as possible before you tell them they're messing it up. I was like, okay, that's logical. That I can do that. And I think it's common sense not to be rude to people and insult people if they have a different way of doing things. But I think it's just as important to see. I always want to talk to people. And because there's things I can learn. There's no ways I know everything. That's just not possible. I could live 50 lifetimes. I don't know everything. And so someone's always going to teach me something. And I'll think and go, hey, I didn't think of it like this. And so then what I do is I take that into my belief system of how I see it. And I go, right, I have to test my system. Because is it correct what I'm saying? Or does this create a flaw? And if it creates a flaw, I have to go back. And if I have to go back all the way to the beginning, then I have to go back all the way to the beginning. And it's that critical, reflective way of looking at it that has allowed me to develop the system where I am. Because people say, oh, you're really smart to get to that. And I go, no, it's not that. I'm really honest. Because no one likes to feel, hey, I'm doing this and it's wrong. But if you do that and go, okay, that doesn't work. How can I make that better? Anyone can evolve anything to a very good level. This is not a magical gift or a unique thing. Everybody has this ability. But medicine will not like it. And so in sports, it's easy for me to treat athletes because the standard of care is so low. Sports is just about getting someone back onto the field as quick as possible. It's how much money do you cost me? How much money do you make me? That's sports. And the other aspect of sports, I've had I consulted for the Chinese Olympic team, and part of my contract was, that was for the 2012 Olympics in London. And part of my contract is I had to work in a public clinic, and I did. I found a clinic, and actually a clinic that I really liked. The guy who, it was a physio clinic. I liked it. He's forward thinking. And some of the people I had to treat were government officials. And one of the guys came to me and he said, I'll double your salary, what the government's paying you. I want you to train my son and daughter for golf. To him, how good are they? And he said, well, I don't let them back inside until they've shot 100. I said, have they played in competition? He said, they've won all the competitions. He said, the day they play a competition and lose, and they still want to play golf, you come and see me. Because winning's easy. Who doesn't like to win? And it's when you lose and you go, okay, what do I need to do different to be better? That's someone who's going to succeed. I mean, it's easy to win. And then when you are number one, it's much harder, because if you're number two, and this is what I say, logic and emotion, you train a number two in the world for tennis, and he says to me, oh, I've just got to get to number one. I don't know. That means you're equal. You've got to beat number one. Not just beat him once. You've got to beat him, however they measure the system, on a number of times, fairly consistently, so you can be number one and he goes to number two. That's like saying the Springboks are playing the All Blacks rugby, and the All Blacks have 8 and the Springboks have 10. And the All Blacks go, oh, we need 2 points. You're not playing to draw. You play to win. You don't need 2. You need 3 or higher. That's logic, not emotion. And you'll be amazed at how many times, not just All Black, whoever, choose the 2. They don't choose the 3. And you listen, what I'm saying and everything I explain about nutrition, mechanics of the body, I just explain it in a way, I guess, which is different and people haven't heard. I'm certainly not reinventing the wheel. No ways. And it's logical. All right. And that comes from correct nutrition.
It's refreshing.
Because this is my point. If we eat properly, the way we look at things we will extract our potential. That's why, irrespective of what religion we are, food always has a very high importance. It doesn't matter what religion. For me, one God, many names, different names, but food's always spoken about, and it's a very important thing. And I think we undervalue food. I think we have to go back to crop rotation and allow soil, to heal. The food can't be better than the soil it's grown in and the environment it lives in. It can't. It's not possible. And it's not about growing more. But the point, it really comes out, if we can't, or if we don't eat properly, we will never get to our potential. Like, where are the Michelangelos of today, the Newtons of today? There are some astonishingly bright people out there. I am a big believer in quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and there's some great stuff that's been done with that and by some extremely bright people. But if you go back in history, I think there were a lot more smarter people. You still have smarter people today, but there's not as many, and I think we are devolving. I don't think we are evolving. We have a phone that is, better than Apollo 11's computer. But is that how I judge improvement in society as a species, how good my computer or technology is? It's crazy, but people do. I always say to people, you must be proactive when it comes to health, because if you're proactive, you can change and get healthy much quicker as opposed to being reactive. And you buy this fancy car and it tells you, every so many kilometers you must go for a service, and you send it for a service. Why don't you look after your body like that? Like, Why don't you proactively address the body? Why reactively? But in the old days in Japan, it was like that. So you would pay a doctor on a retainer to keep you healthy. When you got sick, you didn't pay the doctor. If you think about it, that makes sense. Today, it's you don't pay the doctor. When you're sick, you pay the doctor. And so, it's just not a good system. I would very happily talk to you about musculoskeletal health, because the way we move is important for our joints, so many things, but also for the internal organs. I teach all my patients how to defecate. Now, the English hate it, German and the Swiss love that, but that's extremely important, and I can explain to you why a lot of women, will get piles during childbirth, and they shouldn't. My wife delivered our first child in 12 minutes. 12 minutes. And when I was there and the gynae was saying, push, Stella, push, and I looked at her and I said, I'm using your rules you made that we're allowed to use vulgar words is the word you used. And I said, if you can't explain how to push, then shut it. But just shouting what someone must do is not helpful. And I set my wife up mechanically in the correct position, and I told her what to do.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's normal. Women are designed to give birth. It's not pathology. If a woman requires an episiotomy, that's just, okay, there could be reason, but lying on your back with your legs in a stirrup and your lumbar spine flexed, that's just not what the pelvic floor needs at that point for that. And it shows medicine's approach. It's very male. It's like to see what's going on, not to use the mechanics of the system. And we do so many things like brushing our teeth. I explain to people how to stand properly. Most people don't stand properly, so they use their lower back. And then this is why so many people have a problem with their lower back. And then when I show them how to stand properly, and they go, wow, that's so different. And I go, okay, but now you can do the proper thing or the correct thing. So for me to relax, I like washing the dishes. My wife has domesticated me. It took a while, but I'm there. And I find that relaxing, and my mind goes to places and thinks. I like that because I critically think about things. But I'm always standing properly because I can stand there for hours. Whereas my mother-in-law, who's a doctor, and we don't really see eye to eye because we disagree a lot. And she has this back pain and she has to lean forward. And I say, if you do this, the back's no, I'll take anti-inflammatory. And I go, okay. And so for me, the hardest thing also was to learn some people don't want to heal. And you have to accept it's their choice. And they don't want to heal. And that's fine because it is their choice. They can agree with everything you've said. You've explained it in a logical way. You've shown proof, blah, blah. They don't want to heal. It's their choice. You can't force it. This is not, I don't believe that's the correct way of doing it. But hormonal system's important. The female species, I can prove to you, is superior to the male physiologically. Now, I know you know that, and women always laugh when I tell them. But I can prove that to you medically. So first of all, the thyroid of a female is typically twice the size of a male. That's why Goethe, when you're studying medicine, you'll always have a picture of a female with a thyroid problem. That's very uncommon in men. When you look at the females, in vast majority, even in animal kingdom, they outlive the male. So estrogen makes things like supple and stretchy, and testosterone makes things hard. So ultimately, testosterone pulls in calcium. That's why men are stronger than women. That's generally speaking. But estrogen is definitely, it's a much stronger hormone. When we have too much testosterone, it gets converted into estrogen. I mean, there's 3 different types of estrogen, but it does get converted into estrogen. We all start developing as a female. That's why men have nipples. And then depending on the hormones determines whether it's male or female that is born. Today, you see a lot of hormones that are used to change things. And this is dangerous. Look, I'm not arguing with people who have a belief of A or B, but when you look at, so the Germans are a good example, and that's my nationality. My mother's German, and I use a German passport because the South African passport's useless. the Germans in like the late 70s, even up until the mid 80s, they forced their athletes, Olympic athletes, to take steroids. And I mean, the things that you see today that these women have to live with, it's horrendous. It's criminal. And so messing around with hormones, you really have to know what you're doing, or you're going to have a big problem, and especially steroid hormones. You know, this is not something to be taken lightly, because whilst now, you know, someone might want A, B, and C, what I can assure everyone, as time moves in the future, different things become important, and we want different things. And so when I was young, I wanted Ferrari, and now, you know, I have family, dogs, and I want an estate because I can put everyone in. I don't want a two-seater car. That's not helpful. I don't want to drive fast. But when I see someone driving fast, I'm logical, and I'm an idiot. I used to drive like that. I did. I mean, I can't deny it. I did stupid things when I was young. Absolutely. You know, I'm not denying it. But there's so much more, I believe, we can do as humans. So because I've taken time out, and my daughter's on holiday, so I really stopped working to spend time with her and write the book. When she goes back to school, I'll start working a bit more. So I'm quite flexible on time. I think for you, it's more difficult, but I'm happy to talk about musculoskeletal, where to start.
I would love that. And the other thing I'd really like to talk about, if it's something up your alley, are the female hormones, actually, because so many females have, you know, perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause,
HRT,
and it's
and also contraceptive.
Yeah, and it's getting younger and younger. And I see women in their 30s and 40s, you know, with serious hormonal dysregulation and early onset of menopause. So that would be, you know, maybe we could do a couple more sessions and address both those
Absolutely.
topics.
And I think this is a big problem. And what I say to patients is, you want to look at it this way. You have 4 years. So if you think of someone's lifetime, 4 years is a small percentage. 2 years either side of puberty, you have to get that nutrition. As you get into 2 years before, you have to have your nutrition sorted. And if you don't, you're just playing catch up in the future. So it's so important. This is a big problem, and it's going to get much, much worse. And so what you're seeing today, I know certainly for Europe, so I don't know the data for New Zealand, you see in youngish girls being more violent like men, and kind of doing crime more like men, and men the opposite. And this shows you there's a big switch in the hormones. And so when you see men, you know why old men, the ears get bigger and the nose gets bigger?
Yeah.
Whilst it's not normal, it's common. It's because their balance between testosterone and estrogen's gone out. Estrogen grows this tissue on your nose and your ears. And so that's why they have more estrogen than testosterone. Like, that's wrong. All right. So you're seeing like alopecia, women like losing spots of hair. This is more testosterone than estrogen. And it's very dangerous when a female throws the hormonals and is not dominant on estrogen and becomes dominant on testosterone, because
you know, PCOS is just rife. I mean,
this is common. Yes. And this is one of the body's ways of adapting, trying to survive. So in terms of biochemistry and fluid mechanics, you know, resolving painful periods, all right, by far and away, the uterus is the strongest muscle, not for women or men, the strongest muscle. That's like racing a Porsche against a tricycle. There is no muscle that can contract as hard and as strong as the uterus. So just ask any woman when she goes, you know, that contraction for labor. All right. When the blood chemistry is not working properly and it's too thick and the uterus can't slough the lining of blood off, all right, it contracts really hard, and that's painful. And that shows you the mineralocorticosteroid balance is out. Because when we take salt, sodium chloride, Na plus Cl minus, it splits. And you know, in the blood in the middle, you get the Na plus and Na plus, which pushes things apart. And you get on the periphery, Cl minus and Cl minus, it also pushes things apart. And it's ingenious how it works, because in the middle, it flows faster, and at the periphery, it flows a bit slower. And if we cut ourselves, what happens, the middle moves to the outside and the Na plus Cl minus, and that starts the cascade of clotting.
Yeah.
Okay. And we want that. We want to stop the bleeding, put a scab, etc., etc. But when the blood is too thick, it's not viscous enough. Too thin is also no good. And the uterus is contracting really hard. All right. This is telling you in the future, her mineralocorticosteroid balance is out. So water retention, edema, and blood pressure's going up. And it's easy to resolve. Now, when I say salt, it's not the table salt that you would typically buy in the store because they put so much junk in it. Salt is extremely important. So unfortunately, man's lack of respect for nature, the cleanest salt that's available on our planet would be the pink Himalayan salt. And I say the cleanest salt because we just continue to pollute the world at an astonishing rate. But we need salt. And again, we're not what we consume. So drinking water and absorbing water is different. So if it's a very hot day and you drinking water, all that's doing is just, you're going to pee a lot. If you put a pinch of salt into that bottle of water, not so it tastes salty, but just tiny amounts, a wee bit changes the taste. You'll be able to absorb the water. High school osmosis. Osmosis, that's literally how it works. Now, if you take the extreme, when you see people stranded out at sea and they start drinking seawater, they literally go mad because they dehydrate. It's too salty and it strips all the water out. The system can't function. And so it's always about balance. When we sweat, we lose salt because you've got to push the salt out. It helps the liquid to follow. It's very clever. But as we sweat and we heat up, we're loading the thyroid more. So everything is joined. And so when we discuss the imbalance of hormones, there's so many different things. So if we're using women and all the different things, there's many different problems that can occur. But we really have to go back to the beginning and go, okay, where did it start going wrong? And if we start at that point, we can resolve it. But if you take typically medicine's approach where they look at it now and they just give you something, that's not a solution. So it will always come back to, you need to eat properly. You need to be able to give the body what it needs to produce what it needs so it doesn't go out of balance. All right. And once it's gone out of balance, if you go downstream, you're managing the condition. You're not resolving the condition. And so this is a huge problem. I think you will see a significant increase in depression for young girls. Menopause, early onset, puberty onset at a younger age. So there are a lot of mimickers that can mimic estrogen. And we've created so many. So if you think of the oil industry and what is produced, so if you go look at the creams that you put and you look at the ingredient, if it says petrochemical, it's produced from oil. Actually, in the old days, I remember like Vaseline, they used to call royal jelly because it's produced from the oil industry. So if you just distill it, which is like fermenting at different temperatures, you get gasoline, you can get different things. All right. And so much comes from the oil industry. And that's why when the price of oil goes up, everything goes up. People think, oh, well, the price of gas has gone up. And that's why. So touchscreen, that's oil industry. Anything that's plastic. Anything that's plastic. And so anything that's plastic is to more or less of an extent going to affect the estrogen system and have these estrogen mimickers. And so it becomes even more important to eat in a way to protect the body, from things like this, because we're not going to just shut down the oil industry tomorrow. That's not going to happen. No one's just going to have a different way of having a touch screen that doesn't use the oil industry's stuff that they produce. It's going to take a number of years to invent things like this. So in the meantime, we will need to eat in a way to be able to deal with these toxins. And if we don't, that's why when the UK government asked me to consult on teenage pregnancy, I said no. I said, you ain't going to fix that one because I know how to fix it, but the problem is so big and there's so many things you need to change. You're not going to do that. And so, do what you want, but it's not going to work. because governments, are going, wow, this is becoming very, very expensive when young girls have children and now they don't work, we don't make money, they draw on the state to provide for them and the offspring. And then we go, oh, so depending on how many children you have, we pay, so then they have more children. And so that system costs governments a lot of money. They really, for years, decades, have been trying to fix that. And because they do it wrong, they failed. Same like obesity.
And that's another whole topic to talk about as well. Well, let's get, thank you very much for tonight. And
you're very welcome. I hope I didn't stay.
And I'd love to talk to you about those other topics so we can organise a time for that when it suits you.
You just email me some dates and times, and I will, and the specific things you would like to discuss, then I'm happy. If there's something that is not, what I believe I'm good at, I'll say to you, look, I either don't know or I'm limited in that and I can't provide much information or no information.
That sounds great. All right, I'll stop this recording.